Thank you, Mayor. Let me start with a picture that many of you are probably familiar with, what this site used to look like. This is when Trinity Industries and other heavy manufacturing facilities operated on this site, and in fact was what it looked like several years ago. The mayor talked about 380 agreements. Let me give you a little background without dwelling on some of the minutia that is associated with agreements like this. The City Council passed in 1999 enabling ordinances that allowed us, under state law, to implement a 380 agreement. And specifically what the words say in the city ordinance and are enabled by state law is we can provide loans, we can do performance-based grants, and or city resources and assets to qualified applicants on a case-by-case basis. We can use revenue that the developer generates, whether that revenue is sales tax to the city, and the city earns 1% of the sales tax associated with the sales tax paid. We can use ad valorem tax that is created by the physical improvements on the site. We enable this. If you read the ordinance itself, and most of our ordinances start with whereases and why do we do them in the first place. We do them to develop and to diversify the economy of the city. We do it to create jobs, and we do it to develop or expand commerce. The mayor mentioned some 380 agreements that are in process, and I'll come back to them on the two we've already done. Any agreement is subject, as all matters of this kind are, to City Council approval. These agreements can have a maximum assistance term by law of 10 years, and they can include a wide range of types of projects, from manufacturing on the one hand, research and development. They can be used for historic preservation, they can be used for residential projects, and they can be used for commercial or industrial projects. So in the end, it is a very broadly defined ordinance, and we have chosen as a city to implement these selectively on a case-by-case basis. The two cases I'll highlight here, and then mention the two the mayor mentioned that are in the pipeline. Back in 2006, the city and the county engaged in a 380 agreement. We happen to do it through the downtown TERS, but it's really the same mechanism we have here to support the $150 million Pavilions project just a few blocks from here. The Downtown Management District was part of that, and there was a total of a $14 million grant given to them. We acknowledge that the city's portion of that was for public improvements in the right-of-way, and it included sky bridges across the city's right-of-way and a certain amount of streetscapes and landscaping required, and that was negotiated before it ever came to City Council. Harris County did some of the same things with their portion of the ad valorem tax that was part of this project. The project itself was successful, and then an 11-story office building was part of the project that was privately built as part of it. Built into that agreement were certain performance standards, and I want to emphasize the point, performance standards. Many of the payments that I highlight in this relate to a developer achieving prescribed standards that we negotiate before the fact, and in fact are in fact achieved. In the case of the pavilion, certain leasing requirements were made on that project. Many of them have been achieved, some have not, and some of the payments have not yet been made. Last year in Midtown, the Midtown TERS took a project plan, and that's the form that these take when they go to City Council, allowed the Midtown TERS to make outright grants, and this is a distinction now from what I talked about ad valorem and sales tax, which are not collected at museums, to 3 different museums that had told us that if in fact they received some grants of money, could leverage those grants into matching grants from some of the philanthropic organizations organizations that exist, and all three are in the process of doing that right now. The Buffalo Soldiers Museum, which they acquired from the city that was a former city armory. The Asia House Museum, which is currently under construction and will open next year in this process, and then the African American Art Museum. The two I haven't listed here, and they will be coming before City Council. The first is a residential project that covers 3 areas of the city. It's the first time the city has used these agreements for a residential project. One of those projects is in Cottage Grove off of T.C. Jester. There are 2 other tracks, one on Spring Branch off Hollister, and 3rd Upland Park, which is west of Beltway 8, all in the city. Similarly, in those cases, the city has made an agreement to reimburse a developer for certain public infrastructure that they put in after they generate the revenue to do it. In that case, it's ad valorem tax. The control we have in a mechanism like that is all permits need to be issued for these public infrastructure issues, and then a request with invoices and verification that those are the actual costs that are incurred and can only be paid out of the money actually developed by that project. The 4th one, which will be loaded on City Council next week, is the Oak Farms Dairy. Oak Farms Dairy came to us with an issue on moving that dairy out of town, brought to us by the local council member at that. We have finished our negotiations with the developer that will result in the maintenance of 600 jobs in the Midtown area between Leland and Polk off of Scott Street, and at the same time $40 million of incremental investment to move processing today that is done in Dallas down to here. My point here is that we have a breadth of options that we look at to use the tools at hand. They are limited tools. They're only revenue that's generated by the project itself, but it is what we use for what we would simply describe as leveraging purposes to achieve a public result. This is the outline of the project today. The developer has cleared the site. The developer has completed the remediation necessary on the site from previous environmental issues on the site and has those clearance from the appropriate environmental authorities. The area I've shown in red around here is what we'll describe as the project scope. You'll notice that that project scope extends across Yale, includes some of the median areas, and also includes some of the areas adjacent to White Oak Bayou.